It was a rough week for those having homecoming, except for Eric Dooley because he dominated the Prairie View Panthers. And let's look at the HBCU rankings by the NCAA. Oh yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Do not forget the S on the end. That's South Exclusives. Whew. This was a terrible, Charles Barkley, terrible week for those HBCUs having homecomings. It just was not successful. I hope that the parties were great. I hope the tailgates were great. I hope that everybody was safe. But when it came to that action on the field, if you had a homecoming this week, more times than not, you caught the L. Let's just go through. Gosh, this was just bad. I don't remember, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I've just studied every single week of HBCU homecomings every single year. I've had my fair share of homecoming losses. You know what I mean? So I've done it. But man, this felt like a particularly bad week for homecomings. I'm going to read off every single one. Morgan State had their homecoming versus Norfolk State. Lost 24-21. And I got this list directly from HBCU Game Day because it was just so many. I just was curious because I saw like 3 or 4 lose. And I was like, man, what were the records? So this is why I went and found this. But this list comes courtesy of HBCU Game Day. And I had to add the last one of UAPB on there. But Morgan State versus Norfolk State. Morgan State lost 24-21 last second. Lincoln University, they lost to Chowan 14-16. Virginia State, they lost to Bowie State 14-41. They got the brakes beat off them, put back on. They got them beat off again, right? Then you got Virginia Union, and we finally got a victory. We finally got a victory where we can say, oh, homecoming was successful. Homecoming was fun. Virginia Union came out like the best team in the CIAA would and smacked up Elizabeth City's 49-0. Fayetteville State came out like the best team in their side of the division, and they smacked up St. Augustine 54-0. We have two victories. Then you have Central State. They knocked off Fort Valley State. They lost to Fort Valley State 17-32. Savannah State beat Virginia Lynchburg 28-14. Lane College, they lost their homecoming to Kentucky State 26-31. Tennessee State, they finally got their first victory of the year, and it was in a homecoming game against Bethune-Cookman. Shout out Eddie George, man. I think that he's a pretty good coach. I like what he's doing at Tennessee State, so I'm happy to see him get on the win column for the first time this year. Alabama State, we know what happened with the handshake, but before that, they did lose to Jackson State 26-12. Good game, though. But they lost 26-12 nonetheless. UAPB, they lost to Texas Southern 24-14. So, or was it 24-17? 24-17. They lost. This was just a bad week. You know, that's 12 games that were played for homecoming. And the homecoming team only won 4 times. And when you really think about it, when you really look at who won these games, how many of those games actually went away you didn't think? I would argue that probably more losses went the way you didn't think than wins. Like, I didn't expect that Lane College would have just a total collapse on defense, allowing 31 points. That's the second most they've allowed all year. And they played Tennessee State. The only team that put up more points than that was UAPB, and that's the FBS opponent. But Benedict didn't do that. They didn't do anything like that. So Lane College defense just gave out on them. Morgan State, their momentum was done. Norfolk got their first victory of the year over Morgan State on their homecoming. Now, I did think Tennessee State beating Bethune-Cookman, solid victory. But when you look at Virginia Union, Fayetteville State, they're the two best teams right now. I think it's, I don't want to say it's safe because Bowie State's coming, but they're two of the best teams in the conference. You're supposed to do that on homecoming, especially Union. Union's the best team. I could argue that Union's the best team in Division II football, right? Or HBCU Division II football. Let me not get ahead of myself. But, yeah, that's supposed to happen. And then you look at Savannah State, they knocked off Lynchburg. That's HBCU food. Lynchburg ain't won a game all year. And at least 4 of the 5 losses have been to HBCUs. They are food. All right? Like, these games, and I don't want to take anything from the wins. I'm just saying the wins weren't surprising. They were expected. But Morgan State losing, I didn't expect it. UAPB losing, I'm a Texas Southern alum, so I expected it. But let's be real, it could have went either way. But I'm glad that TSU came out and they showed that they're not on the level with UAPB. All disrespect to UAPB just because we just beat you, but I love you for real. I love you for real. But these games, Lane, I didn't expect them to lose. Like, these were good games, man. And it was just a rough week for those who were having homecomings. Like I said, I hope that the parties were great. I hope the tailgates were great. I hope that everything that you did that night was great, but you were safe with it. But the games? Nah, it wasn't there, man. I just think this was crazy. The Lane College one really shook me up because nobody even hit 20 points. And then here comes Kentucky State dropping 31 on them. This was just a crazy weekend and a really bad weekend. 4-8 for those teams having homecomings. I don't have a deep dive on this one. It is what it is. But going forward, I will have a deep dive as we break down Eric Dooley's homecoming, the unofficial homecoming of Dooley State, and how he absolutely dominated his former team. Before I get into that, however, I would love to tell you about Upside. It's one of the best apps that we have here. If you have to get gas, and if you drive, you do have to get gas. So if you have to go get gas, why not save yourself some money? Even if it's just a couple of dollars. Even if it's just a couple of dollars, why sit there and pay $60 when you could pay $57 or pay $45 when you could pay $40? There's no need for that. Upside is here. It's very simple. It's very simple to use, and I love it. It almost feels too good to be true. To get started, you download the app wherever you get your apps at. Use the promo code LOCKED and get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Then you claim the offer for wherever you are. Use the check, or you click check-in. Pay as usual, use your debit card, credit card, whatever, and then you're going to get the money back. It's just that simple. No hoops to jump through. It's really that simple. And they're using, or the users are earning more than $1 million every week. Download the free Upside app. Use the promo code LOCK to get $5 or more back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That is $5 or more back on your first purchase of $10 or more. As we keep on rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Man, I'm happy to be here. I just feel particularly excited about today's episode. I'm not sure what it is, but I had a lot of fun crafting it. Maybe it was the idea that I could just start with homecoming, right? Maybe that's what it was. And then I get to another homecoming. And at the end, we're going to talk about rankings, and I have teams I want to highlight. I don't know what it is, but I feel really happy. And I hope that you guys are feeling the same joy as we talk about it, man. I'm rolling today. I'm in a good mood. But let's talk about Eric Dooley's homecoming, his return to Prairie View, and how he absolutely dogged his former team. This was a game that was heated from the very beginning. And when I say from the very beginning, I mean before the clock even started. These two teams scrapping before the game, right? It was a real funny video because the guy put his hat right there in the middle of the camera, the dude who was recording, and then showed the fight. Phenomenal promo. Shout out to you. But the fight really set the tone for how I feel like this game was transpiring. I never felt like there was any love lost between the fans. And with Dooley going to Southern, I knew there was going to be no love lost between the players. And it was an interesting thing because I came out for multiple weeks. I might even said this before the game or before the season started, that Prairie View was going to come out an especially level or a special level of motivated. I knew this. But before the season started, I knew this. Prairie View was going to come out with a mission to show Eric Dooley he should have never left. And they did that. They came out with that mission. The only problem is that energy was reciprocated. The only problem is that Southern came out with the same energy, just flipped. They said, we're going to make sure that we know this is our coach and this is still his house. They called it Baton Rouge, Texas. They called it the house that Dooley built. There was energy from Southern that not only matched Prairie View, but outlasted Prairie View. And that's why they were able to win this game. And they absolutely ran off with it. This was a game that is pivotal. It was a very, very important game, especially to the SWAC West. It had a lot of repercussions that came from it. And that's why some people felt like it should have been the game of the week last week. And I'm going to be real with you. It's hard for me to disagree. When I say they were neck and neck, I mean they're right here. Like it's 6-1 and 6-1. Two really tall games. They just are the exact same height. I probably just like picked it. I think I just said it. And I was like, we're going to roll with FAMU. But Southern versus Prairie View was a game that I was excited for before the season even started. The same level as FAMU versus South Carolina State. So overall, I felt like, man, this game lived up to all of the hype. I saw someone saying that Southern was inconsistent when they were 2-2. At that time, they had lost, or maybe they were 2-1. They had lost to Texas Southern and LSU at that point. At that point, they had lost to those teams, but they had beat Florida Memorial. So when I look at it, they said, man, when they're really good, they're good. But when they're bad, they're bad. And I hope that over these last 2 weeks, they've kind of knocked that away. That's my hope, because I don't think it was accurate. I think what happened is they had a bad game versus Texas Southern. That's genuinely what I believed. So I hope that over these last 2 weeks against University Arkansas Pine Bluff and now Prairie View, they kind of defeated that idea that, oh, they're inconsistent. When they're really good, they're good. When they're bad, they're really bad. Like, I hope that's kind of gone. Maybe they need to extend that over the next couple of weeks, even just next week versus Alcorn. Who knows? But I think that they've shown that that offense is strong. All right, they dropped 59 on UAPB, but people looking like, okay, UAPB is a bottom feeder. There's a big disparity between where Southern is and where UAPB is. I give you that. I think Southern's one of the best teams in the conference. I think UAPB is one of, if not the worst team in the conference, right? They're in that category. So I get it. But now when you get to Prairie View, you don't have that excuse. You don't have that excuse. You can't make the argument that there's this big disparity between the two. You honestly, coming into the game, you can make an argument that Prairie View was better. You can make an argument that Prairie View deserved to be the favorites in this game. And what did they do to Prairie View? They come and put down 45 points on them. A defense that hadn't had 45 points put on them at all this year. And they faced the number 2 scoring offense in the FCS in Incarnate Word. And they didn't put 45 points on. They put up 31. They held Incarnate Word to their lowest point total of the season. No one else has done that. They haven't scored 35 or less, or excuse me, they haven't scored less than 35 in any other game than when they played Prairie View. Most games, they're scoring 40 points, 50 points. This is a really good offense that Prairie View was able to keep relatively in check. But when it came to Southern, they dropped 45 on them. We got to put some respect on the offense of Southern. I thought that Besean, also, how could I forget when talking about rankings? Southern is the number 5 scoring offense in the FCS. And I understand they put up a freaking house on Florida Memorial. But they also got shut out versus Texas Southern. Only had 17 points versus LSU. You would think that those games would kind of counteract it. And if they went to just scoring regular, it would have been. However, they came and dropped 59 and dropped 45. So now they're the number 5 scoring offense in the country. We got to put some respect on him, man. Besean McCray, I felt, did a phenomenal job through the air with his legs. I think he had over 300 total yards on the game. He was a monster. And they still don't have that one guy. Like, they don't have that one guy that you're like, oh, you got to watch out for him. But they do it by committee. So they have wide receivers that pop up. And it's like last week. Where did Cornelius Dyson come from? Where did he come from? Going into the game, he had maybe 80-something yards. He had a couple of touchdowns, but he didn't have many catches. He came out this week and doubled his catch total and some. Then he doubled his yardage and some. I'm not going to say this was a breakout game because to me, it feels like every game it could be somebody new. Maybe Dyson does come out and he go ahead and steps up and is that number one top guy that I'm saying that they don't have. But it wouldn't shock me if next week Dyson has 20 yards because somebody else jumps up and has 70, 80 yards. Like, Southern is a committee wide receiving corps. And it's working. If it's going to work, I'm not going to knock it. I think Southern should be looked at as top 5. I said that the winner of FAMU versus South Carolina State should have jumped them. A, FAMU didn't play well enough to jump them. B, I forgot that Southern was playing Prairie View, who was ranked number 4 at the time. So that's why I don't think they should jump them anymore. And we're going to look at these rankings in a second. But what does this loss mean for Prairie View? It means that they need Alcorn to win this weekend. That's what it means. Overall, Southern needed this win more than Prairie View did because I don't think that Southern could have won the West. I think if Southern lost this game, their hopes of winning the West were over. No SWAC championship, no Celebration Bowl. It's over. I don't think you're winning the West with 2 losses in the conference. Be honest with you. I think that the winner of the West is going to have 1 loss in the conference. However, they were able to escape. Prairie View now has 1 loss in the conference. They can battle back. This is not a deafening blow. This is a tough hit, but it's not something you can't get up for. Like this is one you might be down if we're going to do boxing. You might be down for the 6 count. You're not pushing 9, 10. Not with this. It's not over by far if we want to keep it there. You can still win the SWAC West. You just need a little bit of help, and that help comes in the form of Alcorn knocking off Southern this Saturday. By the way, that will be our game of the week. It's a phenomenal week. I don't know how we're going to plan out this week just yet. Tomorrow's episode, well, really Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday's episode, I'm not quite sure how we're going to plan it out, but I have three games that I need to highlight. Southern versus Alcorn, Virginia Union versus Bowie State, and then Benedict versus Albany State. Those are the 3 games I have to find a way to highlight all 3, and I can't just mention them briefly. No, I have to highlight them with at least a topic, if not 2. And then obviously Southern versus Alcorn is going to be our game of the week on Friday, and that's going to be our game that we break down all day on Friday's episode. But going forward, we're going to be talking about these here NCAA HBCU rankings, and I'm excited for them. But before I get into it, I want to tell you about Nissan because they are phenomenal. They partnered with us. Our partners at Nissan have worked with us to create a new segment across the Locked On College network called Thrilling Moments, where we highlight the most exciting play from the HBCU weekend or the most exciting moment. And this week's thrilling moment is exactly what we talked about yesterday. That's the HBCU altercation, the HBCU showdown between Eddie Robinson and Deion Sanders. Listen, that handshake caused up more of an uproar than any game this week. I think it was crazy, but it's a conversation that I thought was pretty fun about professionalism and what disrespect is. If you haven't checked it out on yesterday's episode, go check that out. And maybe I just put it as a thrilling moment to plug yesterday's episode, and if I did, I ain't sorry about it. All right? This segment has been inspired by the thrilling new designs featured across Nissan's new lineup of vehicles. Pursue what thrills you in an all-new Frontier, Armada, or Pathfinder today, available at nissanusa.com. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, shout out to everybody who's still here. Much love to you. We're going to get into these NCAA HBCU rankings, and I don't know what it is, guys, but today I just feel good. I just feel good. But every week the NCAA does their rankings, and they rank all the HBCUs in the FCS division. So no Union, no Albany, no Bowie, no Fayetteville, none of them. Just the FCS HBCUs. And they rank them from the first one to the last one. They don't just stop at 5. They don't just stop at 10. They rank all the HBCUs on the FCS level. I'm highlighting the number 5 or the top 5 teams. And then I also have 5 other teams I want to highlight. There's going to be a little bit of overlap. I think there's 2 teams who are the same. So it's going to be about 8 teams. And I'm going to mention one team slightly. But if you've been here for a while, then you remember that I used to not know how these things were done. I didn't know who voted on them. I actually read today. Reading is fundamental, guys. Usually I just read the list, 1 to the bottom. But today I just happened to read past the bottom, and I realized it's Stan Bexton, whose miniature bio is at the bottom of this list, and his name is at the top of the tagline. I said, wow. It's just about reading, guys. Reading is fundamental. So if you have kids at home, make sure you tell them. The mouth of the South told you. Reading is fundamental. Listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. But here goes the top 5 on the HBCU list. You had Jackson State, you had Alcorn, North Carolina Central, Southern, and then FAMU. The top 3 is the top 3. It's been the same. I don't know if it's going to stay the same, but it's been the same. And that's North Carolina Central at 3, Alcorn at 2, Jackson State at 1. Central has been in the top 3 since the beginning. They went to 3, or they started at 3, went to 2, now they're back at 3. Alcorn has jumped up to number 2. And we're going to have a really telling test this next week. But the biggest movers, the biggest riser was FAMU. They rose 3 spots after knocking off South Carolina State. The biggest faller was Grambling and South Carolina State, who both moved down 3. So those are your biggest movers, both positively and negatively. But when you look at it, you see the biggest game, or the most impactful game as far as rankings go, was FAMU versus South Carolina State, and that was our game of the week. I don't say that to defend my choice, but that's what it was. It was the game of the week, and it was the most impactful as far as the rankings. Now, you can make an argument that the most impactful game was actually the Prairie View Southern game in real life. Like, screw the rankings, but in real life, that was the most impactful, and I'd agree with you on that too. So let's just roll out and let's talk about it. With Grambling, we're going to mention it very briefly, but I don't think there's any more hope or faith from others in Grambling. When I criticized Grambling the last time, I think maybe the last 2 times, I got a common sentiment. A couple of people mentioned it. Why can't Grambling just fail in peace? Fair enough. I'm going to let you fail in peace. We probably will not talk about Grambling much as the season goes on. Maybe when basketball season rolls around. I heard the volleyball team's doing pretty good. So shout out to the volleyball team. They had a lot of adversity. Maybe we'll talk about that. But as far as Grambling football goes, I will allow them to fail in peace. Because right now, I feel like I would be beating a dead horse if I continue to talk about how they're struggling. Hugh Jackson will have another year next year when he probably has more time to get everything together. Maybe that's just his year, and this is the growing pains year. But they are the biggest faller. If they are ever the biggest faller again, I will mention them. Otherwise, I'm not about to beat a dead horse. You're welcome, Graham fam. Now let's get into the teams that I want to highlight. Southern, they jump into the top 5. And like I said, I thought that FAMU, I'll just say FAMU because they're the one who won, but I thought FAMU was going to be the team that jumped them. Unfortunately, I was wrong. But also, I didn't expect that FAMU was going to, or the winner was going to win ugly like that, and also forgot. So it's a little bit of a brain dead moment. And I think that Southern actually has the ability to rise into the top 3 with a win, arguably to top 2. If they knock off Alcorn, it would not shock me if they jump to number 2, man. They've had a really good season. You take out that Prairie View game, or excuse me, that Texas Southern game, they've had a really good season at Southern. So it would not shock me if they jump to number 2. Prairie View, they lost to another high-ranking seed, so they dropped from 4 to 6. I don't have much to say about Southern and Prairie View because I just said it. I just said it, so I'm not going to go right back to it. But those are 2 of the teams that I did want to highlight how they moved. FAMU. FAMU jumped in the top 5, and that's mostly because teams above them didn't hold up their part of the bargain. You know, Prairie View lost. Hampton lost. That's how they jumped, and obviously they beat South Carolina. So they jumped from 8 to 5 because the 3 teams above them lost. But I don't feel like they won pretty. Like, they're on a 4-game winning streak, but they're not winning pretty. I don't think that Coach Simmons is satisfied. And I love FAMU. I love the team that they have. I really like what Moose has been doing. I thought that John Murray Shareed did not have as good a stats as he had the past 2 games. And now you see the passing game wasn't as great. Overall, if they would have beat South Carolina State a little more handedly, I think that maybe they weren't going to beat out Southern for the 4th spot. But I do think you could see a little bit more optimism for them. Defensively, good game. Really good game. I thought they shut down South Carolina State for all but 2 drives. So really good game defensively. But overall, the offense just wasn't getting it going after a while. Once they scored 20 points, it's like they just shut down. And it is what it is, but you have to at least acknowledge that when thinking about the rankings. Also, I paid a lot of attention to Corey Fields and not able to throw the ball well on yesterday's podcast. But I do want to mention that FAMU had really good coverage because I was able to see it with the scope of the lens being a little bit wider than usual. They did have good coverage. But speaking of Corey Fields and South Carolina State, they dropped down 3 spots. And if they don't get that offense going, they're not going to rise. They're not. The defense looks good. I thought B.J. Davis was a star on Saturday. However, if that offense doesn't get cooking, it doesn't matter. When the MEAC games start, they're not winning. If they can't get to getting Shaq Davis involved more frequently, if they can't get Corey Fields and his wide receivers on the same page, or Corey Fields having a little bit more accuracy, or maybe even just some easier passes, if you can't get to that, then you're not going to win. You're 1-4, you've been here, and you got to the Celebration Bowl. But if you don't fix this major problem, I don't think they're going to win many games. They're going to lose multiple MEAC games if the offense does not get it together. And then lastly, the team I want to mention was Hampton. They fell out of the top 5 after 2 losses. Unfortunately, I think they lost 2 games. But unfortunately, this is something I was watching. When they're in the CAA, it's going to be a little bit different. They're probably not going to be too successful. It doesn't look like they are now. If they're not succeeding, how do you rank them, man? They're not even playing HBCUs anymore. By not playing HBCUs, it's just not fair to them when trying to rank them, but you have to do it, and that's why they're dropping. So they have one more game this week. I don't think this opponent is ranked, but after that, they're going to be going through a gauntlet of either currently ranked teams or formerly ranked teams, and it's just a tough situation for them. And when trying to have these rankings, they dropped out of the top 5. They continue to lose in the conference. You can't just say they're not playing HBCUs or they're playing really, high-level competition because they're ranked opponents. I've seen teams get knocked for it. I saw North Dakota State whoop up on North Carolina A&T, and A&T dropped like 8 spots. And that's the number 1 team in the country. Arguably could be an FBS team. So it's only so many times that they can lose. Hopefully they get it together. I'm hoping they win. But overall, this is something I'm going to keep watching until they drop out of the top 10. And if they don't, that means they're winning. So hopefully, fingers crossed, Hampton continues to win and they stay in that top 10 because I would love to see a team succeed outside of the HBCU conferences. But I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day. Every day on tomorrow's episode, we're going to find a way. We're going to break down one of those 3 games, specifically one of the D2 games on tomorrow's episode. I just have to figure out how we're going to do it. But these are major games that we need to pay attention to. For your second listen of the day, make sure you're checking out our conference shows. We put up a lot of great content on the Locked On Podcast Network. But if you ask me, the conference shows is where it's at. We holding it down here. Locked On ACC, Locked On SEC, Pac-12, Big 12, and Sun Belt. And of course, Locked On HBCU also falls in that category. So I might be a little bit biased. But anyway, I appreciate you every time, man. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.